All right, I will say good morning. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, exciting Gemara. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank all of our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nissan, to thank Jerry and Happy Applebaum for dedicating all B'shurim and Droshos this month in memory of Basia Bas Chaim and David Ben Avram, to thank Doctors Paul and Linda Weinberg for dedicating all the Shiurim this month in memory of Mordechai Yehoshua, Ben Peretz Moshe, Miriam, to thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the shiurim this month in the zchus of refuah sheileimah for Kathy's sister Donna Baker-Matson, to thank Teri Czinn for dedicating all the shiurim this month in honor of the birth of their grandson Bunim Tzvi Hersch, to thank Naftali Tilson for dedicating all the shiurim this month with gratitude to his chaver Benjamin Wohl and with wishes for a Chag Kasher V'Sameach to the entire shir, and to thank Avraham Shaindy Kelman for dedicating all the shiurim this month, commemoration of the yahrzeit of Avram's mother, Sara Braina bas Yehoshua Heschel. And the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamos will have an aliyah, and the families in the So with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Lamed Hey. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Lamed Dalet Amud Beis, and we left off with the following. B'may kamiflagi. Both say, what are they arguing about? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, about 19, 20 lines up from the bottom. B'may kamiflagi. Suppose we had a drasha of ultimately the pasuk of the pasuk was V'isha sheyishkav ish oso shichvas zara, that ultimately when there's contact with zera, both man and woman have to go to the mikvah. So we had two different opinions as to what is coming to exclude. One opinion said it's coming to exclude a kala, and the other opinion said, Rabbi Huda, the other opinion said it's coming to exclude bia shelo kedarko. Says Rabbi Micah Miflagi, Rabbanan Sarvi shichva zera prat la'ara, shichva zera comes to exclude ha'ara. We'll say ha'ara means, well, for our purposes, we'll define it as penetration without any zera. So just penetration by itself without zera will not generate a mikvah obligation. Osa, the word osa, prat l'shelo kedarka, ultimately comes to exclude a case of bia shelo kedarka. Rabbi Huda says shelo kedarka v'ara v'shifva zera nafka. Rabbi Huda learns out the exclusion of bia shelo kedarka and ha'ara from the phrase shichvas zera, osa prat lekala, and osa comes to exclude a kala. So we'll say these are all cases where there is a form of bia, but not the form of bia that Allah Chalamaysa would generate an immersion obligation. Kiyasa Ravin Am Rabbi Yochanan, Kol sheshasa achar baila eser shanim v'niseis, shuv eini yoledes. So we'll say comes along Rabbi, say the name Rabbi Yochanan, any woman who waited 10 years after the death of her husband to go ahead and, by the way, I said death of her husband, it doesn't have to mean death, it could mean in the event of divorce as well. The idea is that any woman who waited 10 years to go ahead and get remarried, ultimately, again, shuv eini yoledes, will not become pregnant again. Now, we'll say this seems to be one of these facts, again, that the Gemara is quoting, kind of like one of the facts of that a woman doesn't become pregnant from the first bia. So once again, we go back to the Machlokes Noda Yehuda and the Marsham from yesterday, which is namely that what? Either, again, according to Noda Yehuda, this is a rove, this is what Chazal observed happen most times, or second possibility is that halacha lemaisa nishtanu hateva, that ultimately again this is something that did occur in the past, but lemaisa physiological changes occurred. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman says, Lo shano elashein daita lehinose. This is true only if a woman didn't have intention to get remarried. Aval daita lehinose, but if after the death or divorce of her husband she always had intention to get remarried, the Gemara says misaberes, she has the ability to become pregnant. And interesting, again, I will say, this is not like a hashkafic or metaphoric idea. This is what Chazal are observing were the physiological realities. Amalei Rava, lebas Rav Chisda. So I will say, Rava said to the daughter of Rav Chisda. Now remember again, the daughter of Rav Chisda was Rava's wife. But this was a second marriage for this woman. So what happened? Meranini Rabbanan Abasreich. The rabbis are whispering about you. Why? Because apparently the wife of Rav Chisda was previously married to Rami Bar Chama. And what happened? Her husband passed away, and it was 10 or more years until she married Rava. And what? She became pregnant. She became pregnant. So what's going on over here? So Amrulay Ana Datai Allah Habi. So she said, I always had in mind to marry you after my husband passed away. Right? It's actually according to the Gemara Baba Basra. There's a whole interesting story that occurred regarding her about when she was a young girl. There was some type of illusion that she was going to marry both of these men over the course of her life. But the point, so let's say what comes out according to the Gemara is what the Gemara is saying is like this: when a woman gets divorced or widowed and she has no intention to remarry for 10 years, apparently the fertility window closes. But Lamaisa, if she had in mind to get married during that time, or going to see if she had relations during that time, then halacha Lamaisa, the fertility window remains open. The Gemara tells a story. Hahida asile kamed Rav Yosef. There was a woman who came before Rav Yosef. Amrlo Rebbe. She said, Rabbi, Ana Shahisi Achar Baili Eser Shanam Yalarati. Rabbi, I was widowed or whatever, divorced for 10 years. I wasn't married after my husband passed away or divorced for 10 years, and yet I got remarried and had children. It seems to disprove the statement of Chazal. Both said, listen to this. Amrle Biti, Al Totzi Ilaz Al Divrei Chachamim. My daughter, please do not cast aspersions on the words of the sages. And I both say this is actually very interesting. Rabbi Yosef was saying to her, be honest. Amart Amrale Lenachli Nivalti. She said, you know what? I had relations with a non-Jew. In other words, the idea was that, see, what seems to be coming out of this is that either if a woman does not engage in intimacy, or ultimately, again, has no intentions to remarry, the fertility window closes after 10 years. But if she either A, has in mind to get remarried, or B, engages in relations, the fertility window remains open. Okay, I will say once again, Gemaras like this where Chazal are stating scientific facts or physiological, biological facts are based, again, either according to the Noda Yehuda on Rov, the majority cases of what they've seen, or halacha l'maisa, a reality of nishtana hateva, that physiological changes occur over time. Good. Amar Shmuel. So we'll say, jumping back to the Mishnah for just a moment, for kulon srichos lahamtin shlosha chadashim. Yeah, we'll say again, remember, we saw in the Mishnah, we saw in the Mishnah about the concept of waiting 3 months. Remember again, going back to our Mishnah that we saw in Shabbos' daf, remember you have the two brothers, or we'll call them two brothers or two men who married two sisters. The case evolved in the Mishnah itself. And then remember again, there was a mix-up. When they discover the mix-up and each woman is restored to her proper husband, there's an obligation to wait for 3 months in order to ascertain who's pregnant from who, or if anyone is pregnant from who. We're going to continue now in this sugya a little bit. So Shmuel said, the kulan, all of these women, have to go ahead and wait 3 months. Now I'll say, we're going to see this concept of waiting 3 months, what we'll call havchana. Havchana is a din in general whenever a woman is transitioning between relationships, because we need to know ultimately, again, whose child is who. So the Gemara suggests that this applies to every woman except chutz, migiores, a convert, mishuchreres kitana. So also what this sounds like is a minor girl who converts, or ultimately again a minor girl who is emancipated. Aval kitana bas yisrael tzricha lahamtin gimel chadoshim. So apparently again a minor convert or a minor emancipated servant do not have to wait, but a kitana bas Yisrael, a minor Jewish girl, is obligated to go ahead and wait 3 months. So we'll say, so what's the case? Right? In other words, when we say ultimately again that they have to wait 3 months, that sounds like they're coming off a previous marriage. So what's the case? Ubemai, Iba miyun. If we're talking about a kitana, so we'll say, so now you're telling me that a Jewish girl, so let's say a Jewish girl was married off, right? Married off either by her father or by her mother or her brother. So married girl is married, a minor girl is married off. Now, she's coming off of that first relationship. The halach is that she has to wait 3 months. How is she coming off that previous relationship? Iba miyun. So we'll say, so remember again, if it's a case of where the brother or the mother married her off, remember again, that is a rabbinic marriage. Because it's a rabbinic marriage, it could be dissolved through miyun, simple refusal to continue on with the relationship. Iba miyun, v'amar Shmuel d'lo baya. But yet Shmuel said that in the case of miyun, there is no obligation to wait 3 months. The begat, there's a reason why you don't have to wait after miyun for 3 months. Why? Because who's the only type of girl who's capable of doing miyun? A kitana. And we assume that a kitana cannot become pregnant. So because of that, if she's dissolving a marriage through miyun, ultimately there should be no waiting obligation. V'i beget, and if she's getting divorced with a get, if she's getting divorced by a get, then what? Ha'amar Shmuel chadazimna damar Shmuel miyanabo ina tzricha lahamtin shlosha chadashim nasan laget tzricha lahamtin shlosha chadashim. Then I will say this is actually very interesting. Listen to this case. So you have a girl who is married off to a man by her mother or her brother, right? A specific circumstance, there's no father in the picture. Mother or brother have the ability to marry her off, but what's the nature of that marriage? D'Rabbanan. So Shmuel says like this: if she dissolves the marriage through miyun, there is no need for waiting 3 months. If, however, he gives her a get, there is a need to wait 3 months. Why the distinction? It's the same kitana, right? It's the same kitana. So it's actually very interesting. Because when he gives her a get, there's a concern that if we don't make her do miyun, people will confuse this with what? The case of an adult woman who receives a get. Right? So in order to not have any kind of confusion, if a ketana is divorced with a get, she still has to wait 3 months, lest you confuse that with the case of a gidola who is divorced with a get. But when a ketana leaves the marriage because of miyun, she doesn't have to wait 3 months. Why not? There's no concern of confusion. Why is there no concern of confusion? Because there's no such concept of miyun by a gidola. The concept of miyun only applies in a situation ultimately of kitana. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Ela biznus. So it must be that what are we talking about? A case of znus, where literally, again, a woman engaged in a non-marital act of relations, right? A case of znus. We know that she committed act, and now again she wants to get married. We say fine, but Allah Chalamaisi, you have to wait 3 months to make sure that you're not pregnant. So I will say, top of Lamed, v'gazur labana kitana mishum gidola. And I will say, the Chazal said that even in a case, ultimately, again, of kitana. So if a kitana engages this, I will say, now in general, we should never legislate 3 months by a kitana. Why not? Kitana doesn't become pregnant. But what we begin to see is that Allah Chalamaisa, we will legislate the need to wait 3 months in cases of kitana when we feel that there are cases that you could confuse with gidola. So therefore, again, in a case where a kitana commits an act of znus, we will go ahead and tell her to wait 3 months before she gets married, lest you confuse that with a case of gidola. So the Gemara says, "Umiga zvinan kitana mishum gidola." But do we go ahead and are we gozer a case of kitana because of gidola? In other words, do we legislate cases of the kitana lest you come to confuse with the case of a gidola? Fatanan, we learned im hayu kitano shein ru'uyos leiled. If ultimately, again, we're talking about a situation of kitanos. Both say this. Go back to our Mishnah. Remember again our Mishnah: 2 men married, 2 women. Everything gets mixed up. So now we discover who's married to who. Everyone is restored to their rightful spouse. So what do we learn? Im hayu kitanos shein ru'uyos leiled. If the women in question were kitanos who are unable to become pregnant, machzirin osan miyad. We go ahead and what? Allow them to live with their husbands immediately, meaning no need for any type of 3-month waiting period. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? You see from here that, now again, I would have thought that in this case, we should make kitanos wait 3 months. Why? Lest you come to confuse it with gidolos, adult women. Yet we see that that's not the case. So says the Gemara, Amrav Gidol, Amrav, Horas Shah Haisa. So let's listen to this. Rav Gidol is the name of Rav. It was a Horas Shah. And I will say, Horas Shah means what? It was an extenuating circumstance, and Chazal paskind for extenuating circumstances. So they both say, so listen to this. So in other words, Rashi points out, V'lo Haisa, Delo Gazvina Ba, my time of suppose they said the idea, I'm sorry, wrong Rashi. Suppose they said the idea of here is Horas Shah sounds like this was an extenuating circumstance. So in this case, Chazal allowed for the minor girls to go back to their husbands without waiting. To which the Gemara says, Mechlal, Dahavai. So are you telling me that the case in the Mishnah is actually talking about a case that literally occurred? Right? Because we'll say, the Mishnah doesn't sound that way, right? The Mishnah sounds like it's talking about a theoretical case. The Gemara seems to be saying now that we're talking about an actual case, really talking about an actual case. Ella kihoras shahaisa. Rather says the Gemara, no. the case of the Mishnah is like a horasha, meaning what Rabbi saying, this case in the Mishnah is such an uncommon case. So Rabbi saying, you'll say to yourself, yeah, but we deal with a lot of uncommon cases. Rabbi say, so it's interesting. So here's what's fascinating. Sometimes the Mishnah will put forward a case that is so out of left field, right? That is so uncommon that the truth is we feel like we don't need to legislate additional layers on top of it. This case of two couples and everybody's getting mixed up with who's married to who is such an uncommon case that Chazal did not feel the need to legislate in a case of kitana. So I just want to show you what's happening over here. So the Gemara says, v'chilo flo shia. That's the end. Because this getting mixed up with who's married to who, ultimately, again, is so uncommon that Chazal did not feel the need to legislate in the case of a kitana. So let me frame what's happening over here. I will say, in a pure sense, right? Should a kitana have to wait 3 months between one relationship and another? No, why not? She can't become pregnant. She can't become pregnant. In other words, it's pretty simple. What you begin to see, however, is that Chazal said, we want her to wait 3 months. When? In situations when there's a fear that you'll get mixed up between cases of a kitana and cases of a gedola. So for example, a kitana gets divorced with a get. So what's the halacha? Wait 3 months. Why? Because again, if you don't make her wait 3 months, you could get confused between the case of a kitana with a get and a gedola with a get. Yet, if a kitana ends a marriage with miyun, does she have to wait 3 months? No. Why not? Because only a kitana could do miyun. Right? There's no such thing as miyun by a gedola, and therefore there's no real fear of confusion. So I was saying, watch this. So therefore the Gemara says, but what about the case in the Mishnah? Right? The case in the Mishnah is the case of everything getting mixed up. So the Mishnah says, normally, the couples have to wait 3 months before resuming a normal intimate life together. Yet, if the two women in question were kitanos, they can begin to live with their husbands immediately. Why aren't we concerned that if you allow it by kitanos, you may allow it by gidolos, by adult women as well? To which the Gemara says, this is such an uncommon case. Right? This is such an uncommon case. This is so out of left field that Allah Chazal did not feel the need to legislate the additional layer of stringency. Lishnach, we know another alternate version of this. Amr de Amr Shmuel, Kulan Sheichos Lahamtan Shlosh Chadashim, Chutz Migiores Umishuchreres Gedola. So we'll say an alternate version of the previous statement. Shmuel said all women in general need to wait 3 months, except for a Giores, a convert, Umishuchreres Gedola, an adult convert or an adult Mishuchreres. Okay? Aval, Kitana Bas Yisrael, Eina Tzricha Lahamtan Gimel Chadashim. But ultimately, again, a minor Jewish girl does not have to wait 3 months. So, b'may, I'll say, what's the case? Iba miyun. So I'll say, if it's miyun. In other words, when doesn't a minor Jewish girl have to wait 3 months? So we're talking about miyun. Ha'amar Shmuel said, Ha'amar Shmuel Chadazimna. Shmuel already mentioned this. This is what we said before. That Allah Chalamaisa, when a minor girl is dissolving a marriage based on miyun, there's no need to wait 3 months. Why not? So first of all, b'mitzias you have to wait 3 months. Why? She's a katan, not going to become pregnant. And there's no concern of confusion. Why? Because it's miyun, right? And miyun is a unique process by a katana. There is no parallel process or no comparable process by Gedola, to which the Gemara says, beget, and if ultimately she's getting out of the marriage with a get, ha ka'amar Shmuel debaya. Shmuel already said that what? She does require a get. To which the Gemara says, Da'amar Shmuel mirna bo eina tzricha lahamtin shlosh chadashim, nos on la get, tzricha lahamtin shlosh chadashim. Ella biznus. Rather, we must be talking about a case of znus. And ultimately, again, that's going to be the case, where ultimately, again, that a kitana bas Yisrael, right? If a Jewish minor girl engages in an act of znus, she doesn't require 3 months, right? Why not? Why are we not concerned for confusion? Again, we're not concerned for pregnancy. Why not? She's a kitana, but why wouldn't we be concerned about a mix-up between a case of a kitana who engages in znus and a gedola who engages in znus? To which the Gemara says, uznus bekitana lo shchiach. It's uncommon for a minor girl to engage in an act of znus. So I'll say, you see this concept that by milsa de lo shricha lo gazra beirabanan. in totally uncommon cases, the rabbis don't feel the need to legislate. So the case of a ketana by znus, which again, she's a ketana, she's not becoming pregnant anyway, but the case of a ketana engaging in znus is such an uncommon case, Chazal did not feel the need to legislate. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Gioras Meshuchreres, the Shiach Buznus, Ligzar. I will say, what about the case of Gioras and Meshuchreres? I must remember again, according to this version over here, right? Gioras and Meshuchreres do not require 3 months, do not require havchana. But one second, by Gioras and Meshuchreres, znus is common. I will say, remember again, znus isn't common once the woman converts, but znus is common before a woman converts. And certainly again, a shifcha, right? Avadim and shvachas. So servants, maidservants were known to be immoral. So before their emancipation, they become Jewish. Why aren't we concerned for znus? To which the Gemara says, Hudam Rabbi Yossi, Disanya, listen to this. Hagiores vashvuya vashifcha sheniftu. Let's listen to this. If you have a woman who converted, or a shvuya, a woman who was taken captive and subsequently emancipated, or a shifcha, or a maidservant, who was redeemed, Vishenis Gairu, Vishenis Tachraru. So all of these women of Osai who converted, who were emancipated, who were freed, Tzvichos Lahamtin Gimel Chadashin Dever Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda holds that Allah Chalamaisa, they must wait 3 months before either getting married or ultimately again resuming to live with their husbands. Rabbi Osai, what's the common denominator over here? Gioras, woman before she was Jewish, is assumed to have engaged in immoral behavior. A woman who was taken captive is assumed to have been violated by her captors. A shifcha, a maidservant, is assumed to behave immorally. Therefore, when all of these people transition, either emancipated, freed, or conversion, need to wait 3 months so as to ascertain if they are pregnant or not. These are the words of Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Yossi matra li aretz v'li nasi miyad. Rabbi Yossi says, no, they're permitted to get married immediately. No need to wait 3 months. Amar Rabba, my time is Rabbi Yossi. So I'll say, what's Rabbi Yossi's logic? So the Gemara says, Kasavar, Isha mizana, mishameshes b'moch. Rabbi say, listen to this. Rabbi Yossi says that women who are immoral, right now, immoral doesn't apply to all of these cases. Because remember, the woman who's captive is not immoral, right? The woman who's captive is being violated. Rabbi Yossi says, essentially, whenever a woman is having relations outside of the context of marriage, the assumption is she's using a moch. We will say moch essentially means a form of birth control. Right? We assume that she does not want to become pregnant, and she's going ahead and taking steps. I will say, it's interesting. The concept of moch in Gemara is used in one of 2 ways. Right? Moch could either be something that she inserts prior to relations, almost again as a form of blockage to prevent pregnancy, or it's interesting, although it would not appear to be a very effective form of birth control, is that the use of some type of absorbed material after relations so as to absorb the zera. The second would seem to be much less effective than the first. But nevertheless, again, the idea over here is these women employ some form of birth control in order to ensure that they do not become pregnant, right? Because no one wants to become pregnant from immorality. The shvuya does not want to become pregnant by being violated by her captors. So Rabbi Yossi says, because all of these women employ some form of birth control, therefore there is no need to go ahead and wait 3 months. Amrle Abaye, Bishlam Giores Kaven de Daitele Gure Mintra Nafsha Kidilavskin Ben Shinizra Bikdusha or Ben Shinizra Shalobikdusha. So I understand the case of Giores. Right? Because in the case of Giores, maybe she has a mind to convert, but she's still not Jewish, so perhaps she's still engaging in whatever forms of behavior she's engaging in, but she takes steps in order to ensure that she's not pregnant. Similarly again, Shvuya v'shivchanami, the Shamim mimarayhu mintri nafshayu. But so listen to this. The woman who's captive and the maidservant also, what do they hear? They often hear from their captors that their captors have plans to, or captor/master, to emancipate them, to free them, to emancipate them. As we'll say, it's a very profound yisod. Right? The shvuya, so we'll say, a woman who's taken captive, the idea is she doesn't resign herself to her fate. So she knows that maybe at some point in time she will be released from captivity. The shivcha, the maidservant doesn't resign herself to being a shivcha, she knows that sometimes, ultimately, again, her master will emancipate her, and therefore what? And therefore, minteri nafshayu. Therefore, they go ahead and they guard themselves. Guard themselves from what? From becoming pregnant. I will say, by the way, what a profound metaphor. What a profound metaphor. That sometimes even a person who's captive, even though sometimes I don't really see how I'm going to get out of my captivity, minteri nafshayu. A person guards their neshama. I will say, none of us are perfect, and we often engage in behaviors that we know that we should not be engaging in. But you know what's interesting about people, about us, is that we often have that line, right, that we'll never cross. I'll do a whole bunch of things up until that line. But there's that line, that I won't do. That I won't do. We'll say, why is it that people have their line? Because at the end of the day, mintri nafshayu. What I never want to do is engage in behavior that I feel pushes me past the point of no return. Right? I'll push the envelope and I'll do things that I know that are wrong, but not so wrong. Right? And I will say that line varies from person to person. Right? It's interesting. Everyone has the things that they'll do that I know are wrong, but I also have the things that I'll never do because that's just too far. Because no matter how much of a shvuya or how much of a shivcha I may be, minteri nafshayu. The Jew never fully gives up on themselves. So I'll draw that line somewhere. Of course, our goal in life is to move that line further and further back towards the range of that which is permitted. But it is an incredible yisod. No matter how far we fall, there's always the thing I won't do. Why? Minteri nafshayu. Because I can't totally give up on my ruchnius. I can't totally give up on my holiness. I have to try to preserve something because there's always the possibility that I may be freed in the future. Such an incredible yisod. Ella, so the Gemara says, so what's the case? Ella, biyotzeis v'shin v'ayin heichim ishkachasla. I will say, what about the case of a maidservant who goes out? Remember again, if the master knocks out her tooth or her eye. We will say, so remember again, a maidservant goes free. In that case, she could not have anticipated or planned for that, to which the Gemara says, I maybe will say, according to Rabbi Yossi, any time where emancipation is kind of sudden, Rabbi Yossi would agree that halacha l'maisa, she does have to wait 3 months, to which the Gemara says, Vatnan anusa umafuta tzarach lahamtin gimel chadashin Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi matir le'aris nasimiyad. Yet Rabbi say even by the case of the woman who was violated or the woman who was seduced, Rabbi Yehuda says you have to wait 3 months. Rabbi Yossi says you can get married immediately, which indicates that even in what we'll call unanticipated circumstances like violation, Rabbi Yossi holds you don't have to wait. Allah Amra Abaye says like this: Isha mizana. As soon as a woman, I will say now, here he's using the word mizana, which is whenever a woman has relations outside the marital context. So I will say, what we said before is that when a woman is mizana, if she's mizana in a premeditated fashion, then what? What happens? We assume that, what according to Rabbi Yossi, she uses birth control. She uses the moch. She uses that either that barrier or that post-relations method, but she prevents herself from getting pregnant. Rabbi Yossi says even in a case where a woman engages in the act of relations and it wasn't premeditated. Could mean that Allah says she was violated or she was seduced. In that case, then what? Ultimately, Rabbi Yossi says, Isha misapeches shalot tisaber. Rabbi Yossi says, misapeches literally means turns over. Now, what does that mean? So once again, it doesn't appear to be a very effective form of birth control. But lamaisa, if after the act of relations she stands up, right, for a prolonged period of time, what happens? Gravity does its work and prevents the zera ultimately, again, from impregnating. Again, like I said, I don't know the probability of how effective such a method is, but ultimately, again, that's what would happen. Obviously, it must be effective enough. If Rabbi Yossi, I don't know, maybe she jumps up and down, right? So Rabbi Yossi is saying that halacha l'maisa, it's effective enough to allow her to get remarried, and it's a form of birth control that ultimately could be used even in a non-premeditated state. So the Gemara says, v'idach, the other opinion, Rabbi Yehuda will say, so Rabbi Yehuda will say, well, maybe she didn't jump up and down enough. In other words, that l'maisa, because that is a post-relations form of birth control and not a premeditated form, we're just concerned that it's not effective enough. So both say, I'll just point out to you over here, interesting enough, we'll say this din of waiting 3 months is a very important halacha that comes up all the time, when a woman, again, I will say, it's any case, a woman was divorced, a woman was widowed, right? Let's say we know that a woman did have relations with someone. So what's the halacha by Avchana? So we'll say, so the halacha is the Rambam Paskins, and actually the Shulchan Aruch Paskins the same way. Just Rambam writes it a little bit more in a prolonged fashion. Rambam Hilchos Gerushin, Perek Yud Aleph, Halachos Chaf Aleph, and Chaf Beis, which is Rabbosai, Gzeras Chachamim hi, Sha'afilu Isha She'enu Ru'ya Leileit, Afilu Nisgar Sha'ol Nis'alam Min Ha'erusin, Tzricha Lahamtin Tishim Yom. Rabbosai, Chazal made a blanket Gezerah, that ultimately, again, whether you are widowed or divorced, you have to wait 90 days. And this is true, by the way, even if a woman is let's say we both say, a woman is widowed at the age of 90, K'nai Nahara, but she met someone, Baruch Hashem. So I'll say, and she met someone at the Levaya, for argument's sake. Right? Don't judge. I'll say, so now again, when you're 90, Mamish, you'd like to move things along a little bit, right? So Lamaisa, again, she's going to want to wait till the end of Shiva, right? But Lamaisa, at the end of Shiva already, she's got plans. We tell her, sorry, you have to wait 90 days. That's halacha Rabbosai. She says, really? Right, 90 years old. There's not exactly any concern, ultimately, of pregnancy in this case. So Lamaisa, again, Rabbosai, that's the Takanas Chazal. Chazal said you have to wait 90 days between marriages, even to the point of, let's say a woman was widowed from Erusin. So husband and wife never even lived together, but she was widowed from Erusin. Halacha lamaisa, we wait 90 days. Similarly, shivcha shenishtachrara, if you have an emancipated shivcha or a woman who converts, wait 90 days. Rabbosai, there is one exception to the 90-day rule. Take a guess. What is it? Mion avekitana hamima enes einat tzrichalan. Rabbosai, the one exception to the 90-day rule is if you have a ketana who does miyun, there's no need for 90 days. Ultimately, again, why? Because remember, no one, she's a ketana, she's not pregnant, and it's miyun. So I will say, this case essentially is so removed from the takana of Chazal that it just doesn't apply. But again, if you were to divorce a ketana wife with a get, then what? Would require 90 days. So again, 90 days is just the mandated waiting period between one relationship and another, even if we know that there's no pregnancy. Nevertheless, you have to wait. Only exception, miyun by getana. Beautiful. But we'll say back to the Gemara. So we'll say, so remember again, the Mishnah said that if the two women in question were kohanos, what's that? Halacha? Nifsalu minat truma. They can't eat truma. Says the Gemara. One second, what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, kohanos in Yisraelis lo, emam hayu noshe kohanim. So what it means to say is that halacha l'maisa, if they are wives of kohanim, because ultimately, again, they did have relations with another man, halacha l'maisa, they can't eat truma anymore. To which the Gemara says, Neshei Kohanim in, Neshei Yisraelim lo. So I'll say, so again, why is it only if they are wives of Kohanim? What if they are wives of Yisraelim? V'amar of Amram, Hamil Samalon of Sheshes, Va'an Drinhu, Va'an Harinhu, La'ainon Mimas Nisan, Eshes Yisrael Shenensa, Afa Pish Muteris Labaila Psula L'Kuhuna. We'll say, if ultimately, again, you have the wife of a Jewish man of Yisrael, if she was violated, she's still permitted to her husband, but she is asura to a Kohen. In other words, if her husband were to subsequently pass away, she would not be permitted to go to marry a Kohen. Amarav Achi Kamar, that's what it means to say. Em hayu kohanos nesuas li Yisrael nifsilu min atruma de beinashya. The Mishnah means to say is like this. If you have two, right, so let's go back to our case, our Mishnah. Reuven and Shimon are married to Rachel and Leah. And remember, now we have the whole mix-up. So now again, what happened? It turns out that Reuven had relations with Leah, Shimon had relations with Rachel, a whole mess. Now the whole thing turns out they're both restored to their respective husbands. Everything is fine, right? Everything is fine, except, let's say Rachel and Leah, the sisters, were the daughter of a Kohen. Now, let's say Reuven and Shimon pass away, and Rachel and Leah now go back to their father's home. We'll say the halacha normally is that if a Bas Kohen marries Yisrael, right, when she marries her, she can no longer eat truma. But if her husband passes away without children, she's permitted to go back to her father's home and eat truma. In this case, Rachel and Leah would not be permitted to eat truma. Why? Because effectively, legabe kahuna, they each committed an act of adultery or an act of znus. And once you commit an act of znus, ultimately, again, you are precluded from consuming truma. That's what it means, v'im hayu kohanos. If they were the daughters of kohanim and their husbands died without children, once again, whereas normally they were permitted to go back to their father's home and consume truma, in this case, they would be precluded from doing so. We'll say, Hadron alach arba achin, mazel tov. Lamed hem and beis. Hacholis livim tovenim teismu beres. It was a very interesting case. Let's say a man does chalitza with his yivama, and it turns out that she's pregnant. So we'll say, now watch this case. This is really fascinating. So remember again, a simple case. Reuven and Shimon are brothers. What happens? Reuven passes away. We'll say, right, no co-wives, no sisters, no this. Right? Shimon's single. Right? So Reuven passes away. Shimon goes ahead and he does chalitza. But it turns out that what? Hacholis liyavim. I say does chalitza with Rachel, and it turns out that Rachel is pregnant. Rachel's pregnant. So I will say Violda, and she gives birth. Bisman shavlad shal kayama. So we'll say, so now it turns out that she gives birth. So therefore it turns out, what's the status of the chalitza? Nothing, right? In other words, it's not, we'll say, you can't even say the word invalid, right? Why can't you say the word invalid? It's not shaykh to chalitza, right? It's no different than you go over to a woman on the street and say, hey, let's do chalitza. Besides the fact that it's weird, right? It also what? It also, by the way, and highly unadvisable, right? Highly unadvisable. I will say, but the mice again, it's irrelevant. In other words, it's nothing. It's nothing. So when Shimon does chalitza with his sister-in-law, and it turns out that she was pregnant, it's nothing. And therefore I will say what? Hu mutar b'kravoseh, v'hi mutaris b'kravav. Therefore I will say ultimately again, they're also permitted to marry each other's relatives. So for example, I will say, let's say Rachel has a sister, Leah, right? So remember again, I will say, you're not allowed to marry achos chalutzaso, right? You can't marry the sister of the woman with whom you did chalitza. Midrabah, you can't marry her. In this case, where Shimon did chalitza with Rachel, but it turns out that Rachel was pregnant and she gives birth, Baruch Hashem, to a healthy baby. So Shimon is permitted to marry Rachel's sister. Why? Because Rachel's sister is not achos chalutzaso. There's no relationship there. Similarly, again, Rachel can marry Shimon's relatives. So the Gemara says, "V'lo pasla min hakahuna," and ultimately, again, that chalitza does not pasel Rachel from the Kohen. Because we'll say normally, again, a chalutza cannot marry a Kohen. Why? She's kind of like a grusha. Beautiful. So we'll say, so essentially, case number one is you end up doing chalitza with your sister-in-law who's pregnant, right? You didn't realize she was pregnant at the time. She gives birth to a healthy baby, Baruch Hashem. The chalitza is meaningless. She does not have the status of a chalitza. You can marry her relatives. She can marry your relatives in Shalom al Yisrael. What happens if chas v'shalom ina vlad shal kayama? Let's say she gives birth, but the baby passes away. And I will say ina vlad shal kayama essentially would be a case. Let's say the baby is unfortunately a stillborn, or the baby passes away within 30 days. In general, we say that a baby born within 30 days. It passes away within 30 days, is a vlad she'el shal kayama, was an unsustainable life. That's what the halacha is. We don't normally sit shiva for a baby that passes away within 30 days. Again, there are exceptions to that rule, but lamaisa, let's say she gives birth, and again, it's not a viable baby. So we'll say, so in that case, here's what's interesting: Hu asher b'kravaseha v'asura b'kravav upsula min hakuhuna. So we'll say in that case, he can't marry her relatives. She can't marry his relatives, and she is pulsa from the kuna, which sounds like it's saying what? Good chalitza. But ex post facto, right? Retroactively, the chalitza worked. In other words, we'll say, because it turned out that she gave birth to a non-viable baby, which means that halacha lamaisa, she needs chalitza. Now, you did the chalitza a little prematurely, but lamaisa, again, the chalitza works. Hakoni says, so I was saying, now listen to this case. Case number 2 is, you did yibum. And I will say, what happens? And it turns out that the woman with whom you did yibum is pregnant. So what's the halacha? V'yalda, and then she gives birth. I will say, now obviously we're talking about a case where it's clear that what? The pregnancy was from the deceased brother. right? That must be the case, right? The pregnancy, we know for sure that it's Ruvain's baby. It's Ruvain's baby. So what happens? But Shimon did Yibum. V'yolda, she gives birth. So remember again, everything now depends on the viability of the baby. Bisman Shavlat Shal Kayama, if she gives birth to a healthy baby, so it turns out that what? Ruvain, the deceased brother, has a child, Yotzi, so they have to get divorced. Right? Why do they have to get divorced? Because Lamais, again, it's adultery. Not adultery, but it's Eshesach. It's an erva. So they have to get divorced. V'chayavin bekarban. And by the way, they have to bring a chatos. Right? We have to bring a chatos because, again, inadvertently, but they committed an arayah. They committed one of the arayas. V'mein lavlad. But however, again, if the child's not viable, v'mein lavlad shal kayama, yikayim. Then ultimately, again, Shimon is permitted to remain married to Rachel. Safek ben Tishla Rishon ben Safek ben Shivla Achron. But I will say, here's an interesting case. What happens if she gives birth? And we'll discuss this more in depth. And we're not sure. Is this a 9-month pregnancy from Ruvain? Or is it a premature baby, 7-month baby from Shimon? We're not sure. What's the halacha? Yotzi. So ultimately they have to get divorced. Right? They have to get divorced because Lamaisa, again, you cannot remain married to a woman where there is a Safek Arayas. Ultimately, Vavlad Kasher. Rabbi says it's fascinating. We will not go ahead and make the child a Safek Mamzer, right? Safek Arayas, right? We'll call Safek Mamzer. Rabbi say, why not? We're going to see there's no such thing as a Safek Mamzer, right? Mamzer is a Vadai status. Either you are a Mamzer or you're not a Mamzer. Right? So I'm going to say there's no Safek Mamzer. Again, we'll get into this. So ultimately, as much as we force the couple to divorce because of Safek, the child is kasher, and they have to bring an asham taloi. We'll say asham taloi is the carbon that's brought when you may or may not have violated a serious infraction. Good. Let's analyze. Se'it Marabos, say we learned hachoves the meuberes v'hipila. We'll say let's say it did chalitza. So we'll say so now this is an interesting little bit of a variation of the previous case. So we'll say Reuven and Shimon, 2 brothers. Reuven is married to Rachel. Good, that's the case. Reuven passes away. Now Rachel falls to Shimon. Shimon does chalitza. But he does chalitza. Turns out Rachel was pregnant. But Rachel miscarries. So I will say, so what's the sheileimah? Does Shimon have to do chalitza again? Or did the chalitza that he did suffice? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Rachel does not require another chalitza. The chalitza done during pregnancy works. Reish Lakish says, no, she needs another chalitza. Let's analyze. Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yochanan says she doesn't need another chalitza. Why not? Chalitzas meuberes, shma chalitza, ubias meuberes, shma bia. Rabbi Yochanan says, chalitza and yibum done with a pregnant woman work. Now I'll say, just to be clear, when he says chalitza done with a pregnant woman or yibum done with a pregnant woman, what's the end of that sentence? And what? And she miscarries. Right? And she miscarried. That's the case we're talking about over here. Right? Where the chalitza or yibum was done when she was pregnant, but she subsequently miscarries. Rabbi Yochanan says, it works. You don't have to do another chalitza. Reish Lakish says, no, tzri chalitza min ha'achin. Chalitzas meuberes lo shma chalitza. Ubias meuberes lo shma bia. So I will say, it's a fundamental machlokes. Reish Lakish say, no. Chalitza done to a pregnant woman doesn't work. Or yibum done to a pregnant woman doesn't work. So my commitment, what's the machlokes? This is incredible. So I will say, it could be that they're arguing about a pasuk, or they're arguing about svara. Watch this. If you want to say they're arguing on svara, Rabbi Yochanan says, listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan says like this: Im yavo Eliyahu, I'll say incredible. Im yavo Eliyahu v'yomar daha di ibra mapule mapla mi lav bas chalitza v'yibomi hashtanami tigli milsa lemafreya. So Rabbi Yochanan says like this: tell me, if Eliyahu were to come and tell you that Rachel is going to miscarry, right? Would we not allow yibum and chalitza to occur? So too again, when she miscarries, retroactively, it's shown that what? That Allah Chalamayset works. They both say, so Rabbi Yochanan essentially is saying is like this: Lav dafka that we're going to say lechatchila you should do yibum or chalitza with a pregnant woman. No one's advocating for that. But Rabbi Yochanan is saying ex post facto, it works. Why? Because it turns out that she did not give birth to a viable baby, and therefore halacha lamaisa, there's no reason why it should not work retroactively. Shlakish Amar Tigli Mosala Mafrelo Aminan. So both say In the Svara world, it's a machlokes about retroactivity. Rabbi Yochanan holds retroactivity works. Reish Lakish holds retroactivity does not work. That's the Svara. V'bay semakra. The other possibility is it's a pasuk. Rabbi says, listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan Sara ubein ein lo amrachmana v'hal lesle. Rabbi Yochanan will say, when is Yibum and Chalitza shayich bein ein lo? Bein ein lo means what? Bein ein lo means what? Doesn't have a child. Rabbi say, tell me, does Reuven have a child in this case? And the answer is no. If he doesn't have a child, therefore Yibum Chalitza works, even if now she's pregnant. Veish Lakish savar ubein ein lo ayin alo. Bein ein. Remember again, ein is written malay with a yud. Ayin. Ayin means investigate the matter. And therefore, if she's pregnant, you don't know whether or not Reuben is going to have a kid. And therefore what? Wait. And anything you do during that ayin, investigative period, is going to be invalid. And therefore, Allah Chalamais would require Yibum Chalitza a second time. To which the Gemara says, Eisi Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Kasher Reish Lakish. So we'll say, therefore, fundamental machlokes. You do Yibum or Chalitza with Rachel when she is pregnant. Does it work? Rabbi Yochanan says yes. Reish Lakish says no. So let's analyze. Eis Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan Reish Kasher Reish Lakish. Here we go. Ein havlat shel chayama. From the Mishnah, right? They will say, so again, in the Mishnah's case, a person did chalitza with, right? Shimon did chalitza with Rachel, and Rachel gives birth. If the baby is not viable, who asher bikrovav seha, v'yasura bikrovav. Ultimately, again, then what? Then the chalitza worked. She is asher to his relatives. He is asher to her relatives. Upasla min hakuna. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Bishlam l'didi, da'amina chalitza smu bershma chalitza, mishum haki pasla. So Rabbi Yochanan says, the Mishnah makes sense according to me. Why? Because the Mishnah says pretty explicitly that the chalitza works. That's why Allah Chalamaysa, Shimon can't marry Rachel's relatives. Rachel can't marry Shimon's relatives. Ella, both say first wide line, Ella l'didach, da'amrit chalitza mu bersh lo shma chalitza, my pasla min hakuna. But according to Reish Lakish, who says that chalitza with a pregnant woman does not work, why should Rachel be psula for marrying to the kahuna? Right? She's a widow. The chalitza shouldn't work. Armalei, to which Reish Lakish will say midrabanan ulachumra ba'alma. You're right. Really, midaraisa chalitza with a mubaris doesn't work. Has no impact on this woman, and therefore Allah Chalamai says she's mutaris to the kahuna. We make her asr to the kahuna alza chumra dirabanan. Others say, Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, Ein havlat shel kayama. If the baby is not viable, who asr b'krovav sehal, v'asr b'krovav. So ultimately, the Mishnah said he can't marry her relatives, she can't marry his relatives. Upasla min hakahuna, and ultimately, again, she is not allowed to marry to the kahuna. So says Reish Lakish, Bishlam l'didi da'amina chalitza smu beres lo shma chalitza, hainu diktani pasla min hakahuna l'chumra. So I'll say, Reish Lakish says, according to me, it makes sense that she is psula ultimately to the kahuna, right? Why? Because it's a chumrah, but yet the Mishnah does not say she requires another chalitza. But according to you, Mishnah should say that she does not require chalitza from the brothers. Rabbi Yochanan will say that's true. Tana seifa pasla. According to Rabbi Yochanan will say ultimately again it's just coming to go ahead and maintain Mishnaic symmetry. So we'll say, we'll stop over for today. We're just going to pick up. So just understand we're leaving off in the middle of this fundamental machlokes. So it's fundamental between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Namely, a person does chalitza with a sister-in-law, right? Shimon does chalitza with Rachel and she's pregnant. So I would say, but she miscarries. So was that an appropriate chalitza or not? Rabbi Yochanan saying yes, halach l'maisa it works. Reish Lakish saying no, it does not work. We'll again resolve that machlokes. See him in the halach l'maisa tomorrow. Shkoyach.